It was a regular Tuesday night, quiet and uneventful like most nights in our home. My wife had gone to bed early, worn out from a long day at work, while I stayed up watching TV in the living room. Around midnight, I finally turned the television off and tiptoed into the bedroom. She was fast asleep, her face turned slightly toward the wall, eyes closed, the blankets rising and falling with her slow, steady breaths. I didn't want to wake her, so I moved as silently as I could, opening drawers carefully and changing into my pajamas in the dark. I sat at the edge of the bed for a few minutes, scrolling through my phone, lost in thought. The house was so still, the only sound being the faint hum of the ceiling fan above. Then, as I placed my phone on the nightstand and reached to switch off the lamp, I heard it, her voice quiet but clear. "David, why are you standing there?" I froze. My hand hovered just above the lamp switch. She was still facing away from me, her eyes shut, her body completely motionless. I didn't reply. I couldn't. I just stared at her in the dim light, my mind racing. I sat down slowly on the bed, watching her. She didn't move again. Maybe she was dreaming, I thought. Maybe it was just random sleep talk. I tried to shake it off, to reason through it. But there was something about the tone of her voice, calm, focused, like someone narrating exactly what they were seeing. I turned off the lamp and lay down beside her, heart still beating a little faster than normal. I closed my eyes and tried to sleep, but it wasn't easy. The next night, I stayed up again, working on my laptop while she went to bed early. She fell asleep within minutes, her breathing deep and even. I stayed at the desk in the corner of the bedroom, typing quietly. At one point, I got up to grab a glass of water from the kitchen. I didn't turn on any lights, just used the faint glow of my phone screen to guide me. As I stepped into the hallway, I heard it again. "Don't forget your phone." Her. The voice came from the bedroom. I turned around and looked. She hadn't moved. I walked back in, stunned, and stared at her sleeping form. She said nothing more. I reached for my phone, which I had indeed left on the table. My hand was trembling. I began testing it. I opened and closed the bedroom door slowly. She said nothing. I moved to the dresser and took out a shirt. Still, nothing. Then I stood still in the middle of the room. "Don't just stand there," she mumbled, voice soft but firm. I nearly dropped the shirt. She had spoken again, with her eyes closed, not even flinching. I didn't tell her the next day. What would I even say? That she was narrating my movements like she was watching me through her eyelids. That she knew what I was doing, where I was going, what I had forgotten, all while supposedly fast asleep. It felt ridiculous, but as the nights continued, it became harder and harder to explain it away as coincidence. She never moved, never opened her eyes, but she always knew. Every tiny thing I did in that room, she described it, whispered it, sometimes even before I had fully made the move myself. I started to feel like I was being watched, not just by her, but by something through her, something that never slept. The following nights unfolded like a carefully orchestrated nightmare, one where I couldn't tell if I was losing my grip on reality or if something far stranger was at play. After that first whisper, I paid closer attention to my wife. As she slept, I watched her carefully, cautiously, as I moved around the room, making sure to note every sound I made, every motion, every subtle shift in the air. And without fail, she would respond to me. Not always immediately, not always clearly, but her words were always accurate. always tied directly to something I had done. I began experimenting. Some nights I would deliberately walk to the corner of the room and stand completely still, not moving a muscle. I wouldn't breathe too deeply, wouldn't shuffle my feet, wouldn't even touch my phone. And every single time, she'd mutter something chillingly precise. "You're just standing there again," she said one night, her voice flat and soft. I didn't move. I didn't respond. I simply stared at her, watching her face for signs of awareness. Her eyelids never twitched. Her breathing never broke rhythm. She was asleep, but she saw me. It escalated slowly, in strange, subtle ways. One night, I quietly took out a notebook and started writing. Just scribbles, nonsense words, anything to distract myself from the eerie silence. I hadn't made a sound. I hadn't even turned the page loudly, but she mumbled, "You're writing again. Why are you always writing?" The hair on my arms stood straight up. I dropped the pen. She didn't react further, just kept breathing softly, peacefully, like a person completely disconnected from the world. Except she wasn't disconnected. She was tuned in to every little detail of mine. I began to dread the nights. I'd lie awake, waiting for her to speak, waiting for the moment her calm voice would cut through the silence and narrate my most private, quiet actions. She always got it right. Whether I was putting on socks, opening the closet, brushing lint off my pants, she knew. She'd say things like, "That drawer's stuck again," or "Don't trip on the charger," even though I hadn't made a sound. There were times I wondered if she had cameras planted in the house, some kind of bizarre prank, but the fear I felt wasn't the kind that came from jokes. It came from something deeper, something primal. I stopped sleeping in the bedroom. I started bringing blankets to the living room couch, keeping the lights on and the television playing low just to drown out the quiet. But it didn't matter. One night, just as I was dozing off on the couch, I heard her voice faintly echo from the hallway. "The couch isn't helping," she whispered. I sat up, heart racing. I hadn't told her I moved to the couch. I hadn't made any noise, but she knew. Always. The distance didn't matter. The silence didn't matter. She always described what I was doing as if there was a part of her that never fully shut down, like some invisible thread kept her connected to everything around her, to me. It was no longer just strange or creepy. It became suffocating. I started flinching every time she mumbled. I began recording her sleep talk just to prove to myself I wasn't going crazy. And the recordings chilled me more than the moments themselves. Her voice sounded normal, but with a strange tone, distant, flat, yet entirely aware, as though someone or something was simply using her as a vessel to observe me. I thought I could get used to it. I thought if I just kept calm and ignored the strange things she whispered at night, it would pass. But it didn't. In fact, it got worse. It was no longer just about what I was doing. She started describing things I hadn't done yet, things I was just thinking about doing. The first time it happened, I didn't even realize it right away. I had been lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, debating whether I should get up to check the back door. I hadn't moved a muscle, hadn't made a decision. But as the thought crossed my mind, her voice broke the silence. "It's locked. You don't need to check it again." I turned to her, startled. Her eyes were shut, her breathing slow and steady, just like always. I didn't get up. I didn't even speak. I just laid there, watching her, trying to process what I had just heard. Maybe it was another coincidence. Maybe I had checked it earlier, and she was half aware of it. But deep down, I knew better. She had responded to a thought I hadn't acted on, a thought I hadn't said out loud. That wasn't a coincidence. That was something else. Over the next few nights, the pattern repeated. I would silently consider, standing up to get water, and before I could swing my feet off the bed, she'd whisper, "You're not even thirsty." I'd think about texting a friend who had messaged earlier in the day, and she'd murmur, "It's too late to be reaching out to anyone." Her timing was always perfect, always just a second before I moved. It was as if she had access to the inner workings of my mind, reading each flicker of intention before I had the chance to act on it. I began to feel exposed, stripped bare. Every private moment, every passing thought was no longer mine alone. There was no barrier between my mind and her words. I started testing it deliberately. I would think of strange, random things to see if she would respond. One night, I imagined standing in the middle of the road outside our house, barefoot in the cold, just to see if she'd react. She mumbled, "You'll catch a cold if you go out there," and I nearly dropped the glass I was holding. She had responded to an imaginary scenario I hadn't even believed I'd follow through on. It wasn't about real intentions. It was about the mere existence of the thought. I grew paranoid, afraid to even think freely around her. I stopped myself mid-thought sometimes, worried that she might say something again. I avoided eye contact during the day, unsure if any trace of what was happening at night lingered in her when she was awake. She seemed normal, completely unaware, but I couldn't look at her without wondering who or what was whispering through her after dark. There was one night that truly shattered my sense of safety. I was lying in bed, staring at her, mentally, rehearsing a lie, something harmless, just an excuse for why I was going to leave the house early the next morning. As soon as I crafted the sentence in my mind, she whispered, "Don't lie to me, David." The room was silent except for those 5 words. My skin prickled. She didn't move after that, just lay there, eyes closed, like nothing had happened. But something had, something I couldn't explain. I stopped pretending it was just sleep talking. I started to believe that something else was inside her, something that could reach into my head and pluck thoughts from my mind like pages from an open book. It was a stormy night, the kind where the wind rattles the windows and the rain drums steadily against the roof. The kind of night where every shadow seems to stretch a little too far and every creak of the house feels a little too deliberate. I had been on edge all day, the weight of sleepless nights and eerie whispers pressing down on me like an invisible hand. My wife had gone to bed early again, as usual. She fell asleep instantly, as if whatever haunted our nights gave her no resistance. I stayed up, staring out the window, watching the trees bend in the wind, trying to push away the heavy sense of dread that had settled in my chest. I don't know what made me do it, but I turned off all the lights in the house that night. Maybe I wanted to face the fear directly. Maybe I was tired of hiding under the glow of lamps and flickering TV screens. The darkness made everything feel heavier, more real. I moved slowly through the hallway, the wooden floor groaning under my feet, each step sounding far too loud in the silence. The storm outside masked some of the noise, but inside the house, it felt like I was disturbing something ancient, something waiting. I walked into the bedroom to check on her. She was lying there, just like always, on her side, eyes closed, hands folded under the pillow. Her face looked peaceful, almost unnaturally so, like a statue carved with intention. I stood at the foot of the bed, unsure of what I was even doing. I wasn't tired. I wasn't ready to sleep. I just needed to feel like I wasn't alone. But then she spoke. Her voice was soft, but it cut through the air like a knife. "Don't turn around." I froze. Those 3 words stopped everything. My thoughts, my breathing, my heartbeat. I hadn't moved. I hadn't made a sound. I was just standing there, in the dark, feet rooted to the floor. Her words weren't vague or dreamlike like before. They were urgent, specific, a command. "Don't turn around," she repeated, this time quieter, like she didn't want whatever was behind me to hear her. My entire body tensed. The room suddenly felt smaller, tighter. I was acutely aware of every inch of space behind me. The open door, the hallway, the shadows that stretched across the walls. I felt a presence, not imagined, not abstract, but real. I could feel the weight of something or someone standing just inches behind me. I didn't dare move. I didn't even blink. The air had changed, gone cold, like all the warmth had been drained from the room in an instant. She kept talking. "He's watching you." Her voice was still calm, but now there was a tremble beneath it, like she was trying to hold back fear. "He doesn't like when you see him." I wanted to run. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't move. I couldn't even look at her. I was afraid that if I shifted even slightly, whatever was behind me would react. The storm outside raged louder. A flash of lightning lit up the room for a split second, but I didn't dare use it as an excuse to turn. I stared straight ahead, too afraid to even close my eyes. My wife said one more thing, barely audible over the thunder. "He's smiling." Those words chilled me deeper than anything she'd ever said. I didn't need to see it. I could feel it, that presence behind me, heavy and grinning in the dark, soaking in my fear like it had been waiting for it. The air in the house had changed. Not in any physical way I could explain, not colder, not heavier, not humid, but in some invisible, instinctual way that made the hairs on my arms stand up, even in silence. By this point, my wife's nightly whispers were no longer just unsettling. They were terrifying, intentional, and filled with a creeping malice that hadn't been there before. It was no longer just about her describing what I was doing or thinking. Something had shifted. Something was starting to speak through her. It began subtly. Her tone changed first. In the beginning, her sleep talk had been soft and disoriented, like a person drifting in and out of dreams. But now, it was steady, controlled, measured. She would speak with a cadence that was foreign to her usual voice, lower, slower, almost like someone else was reciting lines from a script. I would be sitting on the edge of the bed or walking quietly into the room, and she would say things like, "You shouldn't be awake right now," or "He doesn't like being watched." The voice that spoke those words wasn't exactly hers. It wore her voice like a mask, but the soul behind it felt wrong, too calm, too aware. One night, I stayed up in the living room again, hoping to escape the suffocating tension that seemed to brew in the bedroom. I left all the lights on, turned the TV volume low, and buried myself under a blanket. Around 2:30 a.m., I heard footsteps. Soft, slow, measured. My stomach clenched. I hadn't heard the bedroom door open. I hadn't heard her get up, but I knew it was her. I couldn't explain how I just felt it. The steps stopped just outside the room. Then came her voice. "You think this light will protect you," she said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement, accusatory, almost mocking. I turned my head toward the hallway and saw her silhouette standing at the edge of the wall, partially hidden in the shadows. Her head was tilted slightly, her arms loose by her sides. She didn't move. She just stood there, staring, or rather, knowing, because I couldn't even tell if her eyes were open. I couldn't see her face clearly, but I could hear her breathing, steady even. I whispered her name. She didn't respond. I whispered it again, louder this time. Nothing. Then slowly, she turned and walked away, back into the dark hallway without another word. I stayed on the couch all night, too afraid to move. The next morning, she had no memory of it. She looked at me with concern when I asked her if she'd been up during the night. She said she'd slept fine, hadn't even gotten out of bed. I didn't argue. I didn't tell her what I'd seen. But something had changed. Her voice at night now carried a weight it never had before, like something other had slipped into her dreams and made itself comfortable there. A few nights later, I sat in the kitchen, hunched over the table, writing down everything I could. Remember, I was trying to piece it all together, to make sense of the whispers and the growing sense of dread I felt around her. The clock read 3:06 a.m. I was alone, or so I thought. Then, from the hallway, I heard her voice again. It was louder this time, clearer. "Stop writing," she said, her voice laced with something that sounded like warning or command. "We already know." I looked toward the door. I didn't see her. I didn't hear footsteps. Just those words echoing softly from somewhere just out of sight. It wasn't just her anymore. Something else was speaking now. Something that knew exactly who I was. Something that didn't need eyes to see me. By now, I had accepted that my wife was no longer just sleep-talking. What had started as an eerie coincidence had grown into something much more sinister, something that reached into parts of her that she didn't even know existed. The whispers were no longer just a nighttime event. They began to bleed into the day, and worse, she didn't remember a single thing. She would wake up every morning refreshed, calm, smiling even, completely unaware of the terror she brought into our home. Each night, she would look at me with soft eyes, ask why I looked so tired, why I hadn't been sleeping, and all I could do was force a smile and pretend everything was okay. But it wasn't. During the day, she was still the woman I married, warm, kind, curious about my work, asking about what groceries we needed or what movie we should watch after dinner. But there were moments, fleeting ones, when something about her didn't feel right. A second too long of silence while staring at me, a sudden shift in tone when asking what time I'd be home, a strange way of turning her head when I if she was listening not just to what I was saying, but to something behind it. It was subtle enough to dismiss, but persistent enough to unsettle me. At night, her sleep was deep and immediate. The moment her head touched the pillow, it was like a switch flipped. She would go completely still, her breathing shallow but consistent. I used to find comfort in her presence next to me in bed. Now I dreaded it. I would lie on my side, staring at the wall, afraid to move, afraid to think. Every night, without fail, the voice would come. Sometimes at midnight, sometimes at 3, but always when I least expected it. And it was no longer just descriptions of my actions or my thoughts. It was conversations. Direct, cold, unmistakably intentional. "You shouldn't be here," she said one night, her voice low, her back turned to me. I didn't reply. I didn't even breathe too loud. "You think she's still in here?" she continued. "You're wrong." My blood ran cold. It wasn't just the words, it was the way they were said. calm, collected, almost amused. And I knew whoever was speaking wasn't just pretending to be her, it was using her, borrowing her shell. I had stopped responding out loud by this point. There was no point. Whatever was behind those words didn't need me to speak. It already knew. It had already seen. The line between sleep and waking started to blur. I began seeing her lips twitch during the day, like they were trying to form words that she wasn't aware of. Sometimes I'd hear her humming in the kitchen, a soft tune I'd never heard before, repeating the same few notes over and over. Once, I caught her staring into the mirror for almost 10 minutes, completely still. When I asked her what she was doing, she blinked like she had just woken up and said she didn't even realize she'd zoned out. Then came the final shift. One evening, while we were sitting in the living room, she looked up from her book and asked, "Why are you afraid of me?" She smiled softly after saying it, like it was a joke, but her eyes didn't match the smile. There was something else. Behind them, a flicker of awareness, of possession. I didn't know how to answer her. I just looked away, heart pounding, unable to meet her gaze. That was when I realized it wasn't just her voice being used at night. It wasn't just dreams. Whatever had started this wasn't content with living in the dark anymore. It was seeping through, quietly, patiently, and it was learning how to wear her like skin.